Over a period of time, I had gained a lot of weight, and then I had a situation a few years ago where I fell and damaged my hip pretty extensively, where now I'm getting my hip replaced, and I wasn't able to exercise to a point where I could kind of lose weight to feel better. And it just got so out of control. My orthopedic surgeon at the time recommended the surgery, and I kind of put it off. And then I finally, after some research and speaking to a couple of different facilities, I decided to do it. Well, I believe there was probably 2 or 3 facilities that were in kind of driving distance that I felt were equipped, both technically and from a manpower standpoint, a physician standpoint, to do this. One was MUSC, one was the Mayo, and one was a local hospital here. The measurements I used, I guess, was amount of surgeries, personality of the doctor, okay, personality of the facility, MUSC, the people I was dealing with, and billing, and then kind of post-care. So I asked a lot of questions along those lines, which were very important to me. So what was important to me when I went up there the first time was cleanliness. And you check to make sure everyone is pumping on the machine when they walk in, even if they're having a conversation, they're wiping their hands. And I was kind of a heightened awareness of kind of the place and make sure it was spotless, and it was. So that was definitely a check mark for me to kind of check things out. But when I talked to Susan at MUSC, her follow-up, her responses were amazing. She was consistent across the board, always spoke to me quickly when I had questions, emails back and forth. And I only talked to one person, it was her. And when finally we agreed that this was the right thing to do, she put me in touch with the rest of the staff. First was obviously the introduction to the organization in terms of the doctor, the facility, and then they explained to me the process that I'd have to go to pre-surgery, which was obviously meeting with the doctor, the financial end of it, obviously, the psych evaluations, pre-op, which the pre-op activity in terms of making sure my doctor cleared me, and then whatever came out of that, kind of review with him, and then getting that all kind of nailed down. That was pretty extensive. It was, top to bottom, I had to be, totally cleared, which was a pretty impressive kind of steps I had to go through for that. But in terms of, wanting to make sure that I was comfortable with everything along the way, I got to meet even the post-care people before the surgery. They introduced me to them. In fact, they visited with me. So I thought that was pretty cool. But just, making sure I understood what was going to go on ahead of time. And then after the surgery, they explained to me, I'd be back 30 days and like 90 days, 180 days, and so on. And then one of the things I kind of discounted immediately was this whole the dietary portion of this, the dietitian portion. Not that I was going to eat what I wanted to eat, but I could figure this out on my own. Well, I learned very quickly. That was a bad judgment on my part because, I met with the dietitian well in advance of the surgery via the phone. And then, they visited me in the hospital, and then I had several. When I went up for my 30-day visit, I spent, 20 minutes, a half hour with, Jerry and the doctor and Diana, and then I spent an hour with her. And I had tons of questions about what I could and couldn't eat, because, obviously I wasn't able to eat the things that I thought I could eat in terms of not so much volume as much as the types of food. And she gave me a lot of good insight on kind of what I could eat. So I think that's it was a really important step that I discounted, but in reality was probably as important as the surgery. You have to go through a process in your mind in terms of making sure that you are comfortable in doing the surgery. That's number one. Number two, the facility is very important. I think the surgery and the post-care are equally important. I mean, a surgeon is going to be able to do the surgery, but if it doesn't have the staff behind him or her to do the surgery, I think it's a failure. And I think that was I made the right choice for sure. But understanding kind of who I was dealing with during this whole kind of pre-surgery process was amazing and very important to me. When I went into this, I probably thought through, most of the things and said, well, I can discount the psych part as I'm strong-minded, I can kind of sort this out. Or the dietitian, I can read a pamphlet. What do I need to talk to her for or him for? Wrong. Definitely wrong. I think, going through it, sitting there doing the psych evaluation, I said, I discounted most of this. But at the end, when I got out of that surgery, I was lost. In my mind, I was lost. I really needed to rely on a lot of different things that I didn't think I'd ever have to rely on. So making sure you were strong-minded through the psych evaluation, sitting with the psychologist and psychiatrist was very important. Because in the end, you know, they want to make sure that you can get through this. Because I think that if you're not prepared for it in advance, you're going to have a problem. You will have a problem. I mean that. I think it's pretty important.